Planis Ransom, Chapter 24. The Humans Go A-Hunting. I watched as the boys settled down on the floor beside me, eating as Mitch spread the paper out between us. As plans went, this one was pretty simple. It was pretty devious as well, using the Heritage's own trap against them and then adding a couple of traps of our own. I was thinking the army taught its people a ton of interesting survival things when Mitch told me he'd learnt these tricks on his own. We're not supposed to build booby traps like this when we're on military exercises, he said, getting me to use the control box he'd built for the drone he had lifting the log. And the scoutmaster threatened to throw me out if he caught me digging another pit trap in a national park, or anywhere else for that matter. So I found a couple of survival books in a second-hand bookstore and took myself camping. On your own? I asked. I didn't mind camping, but I'd never have wanted to go on my own. Going with my family on Christmas holidays was enough. Too many flies and no air conditioning. At least we camped out in campgrounds, though. Showers and toilets that flush are not to be overrated. I made myself focus on the drone so they could keep the log steady, while Mitch and Saeed checked the knots and made sure the log would swing in the right direction. And then I brought the drone back. Apparently, being a grown up meant you got slightly better toys for survival training, and Mitch had brought as many with him as he could. As I let it settle to the ground, Taylor called in. Next log's ready for moving. I looked over at Mitch. Where do you want it? I said, watching as he and Saeed jumped down from their tree. Give us a minute, he said, and we worked our way around Su-Lynn's camp until he picked out another tree. Here. You got it, boss. And I turned away to find where Taylor had cut down the next piece of our trap. That one took a bit of coordination, and it was a good thing Mitch had brought two drones, because it took Taylor and me a good 30 minutes to wiggle our log out of the spot it had landed and over to where Mitch wanted it. He grinned when he saw it. Nice one, Tay. Now, if you girls could just hold it steady, me and Saeed will get it in place. I couldn't help staring at him. Up until now, I'd thought I was the only one who knew about Taylor's preference for being thought of as a girl. Mitch caught my look and gave me a quick smile as he climbed up into the tree, so I figured we could talk about it later. At least it was one less thing to worry about. And judging from Saeed and David's reaction, I didn't have to worry about telling them either. How David knew was pretty much a no-brainer, but I had to wonder about Saeed. Later, I reminded myself as Mitch and Saeed finished laying the rope across the log. This time, both he and Saeed stood on top of it, and then he gave the signal for Taylor and me to lift. It was a good thing we'd gotten used to working together while we'd been bringing the log over. We might have dropped them otherwise. As it was, I was pretty glad when they stepped off the log and onto the tree branch they were going to attach it to. It was much easier to keep it balanced on the drones without them on top. They were done and down, and we were headed down to help Davo finish up the pit he was digging, when each of our comlinks gave a very sharp ping. They're coming, David said, and he'd gone pale. Mitch patted him on the back and took the shovel. Looks like we're going to have to do this without the pit, he said. You ready, Laurie? I felt all kinds of knots turning my innards into a mess, but I gave him a smile. You think we can take 'em? He nodded. I know we can. Then I'm ready, I told him, hoping he wasn't pulling some kind of stupid army pep talk trick. And the boys sprinted for the logs. I didn't want to think about what was going to happen next, but I headed in to Su-Lynn's camp like I'd forgotten what happened last time, or was too desperate to care. We figured some of the fight where I got knocked down would have been caught on recording, that somewhere some lizard had watched the footage of their leader taking me down just before Mitch returned the favor, which meant it was the only logic which meant it was only logical I'd be looking for Su-Lynn's medkit. Well, it was worth a try. There's only 9 now, Mitch had said when he'd asked me how many heritage I thought there'd be to start with, and I told him 12. He and Taylor had shared a look that meant nothing nice, and I wondered how Taylor could reconcile being a girl with knocking an alien out with a stick and then shooting it with its own gun. I'll give her this. She had turned a bit green when she told me about that last bit. Mitch had leant over and put his hand on her knee. He was trying to kill you, he said, and Taylor had nodded, but the look on her face said she was haunted by what she'd done. I'll give him credit. Mitch had moved over and hugged her and let her cry behind the shelter of his arms, and then he changed the topic. Well, just a little. I had 2 to deal with, he said, so there wasn't time to be nice. I grabbed the leader's gun and turned it on him while he was still holding it, and then I used it to shoot his friend. He risked a glance at Taylor. And I'd do it again. From the look on his face when he said that, he wanted to do it again. He was angry, and shooting them clearly hadn't been enough. Hey, I said, are you okay? I'll be better when there aren't any more heritage left, he said. And that was when I remembered he'd been a soldier, was probably still a soldier at heart, and I realized he might be happy now he had a war to win. I didn't know what he'd do when it was all over, but then I felt like shooting a few of the heritage myself, which is why I was heading into Su-Lynn's camp, even though we all knew the place was a trap. I had to trust that Mitch had known what he was doing when he placed the logs, had to hope the heritage didn't find where we'd cut them down and guess what we'd done. I couldn't see how they might do that, but the thought was always at the back of my mind. And then there was the fact that I had to get them to stand in exactly the right spot and not end up there myself. I thought of the size of the logs and shivered. What if all the rest came at once? I thought, and then I shoved that thought right out of my head. The heritage were looking for all of us. Saeed had stayed out of the fight I'd been in, and David had still been in his box. And I was probably the only one who knew where Alicia's pot had gone. Probably. Oh, God. I hoped they hadn't hacked the keeper's files yet. We had to hurry. I stepped up the pace. It was important for me to get into the pod before the heritage got here. The plan was for me to meet them just outside. As plans went, it wasn't too bad. I wondered just how cooperative the heritage were going to be in helping us pull it off. I ignored the recorded Su-Lynn message about how they had been Evernatch in human disguise, and I marched right up to the pod. Pod, open! I demanded, and this time the pod opened, revealing the interior of a full pod, and not one that had been stripped to the bone. This was weird, considering I knew Su-Lynn had gutted her pod when she'd had her keeper move the inside of it into the nearby cave. I figured the heritage must have found the empty pod and filled it with just enough gear that it looked normal, the perfect trap for the unwary colonist looking for the rest of her group. I hesitated before stepping into the pod. This was where everything got tricky. We didn't know how the Evernatch had rigged the pod. Did it just close around the person it had caught, or did it maybe close up and fly away? Mitch hadn't liked the risk, but we had to do something to draw the Evernatch out. We were banking on the idea that the heritage hadn't come with everything they needed to make the pod do what it was able to do before. That, and on Su-Lynn's pod being one of the ones too damaged from its landing to move. So all that meant that because Su-Lynn's keeper had moved the pod once, the most the heritage could do was use it like a trap and keep whoever they'd caught inside. We were banking on them having to come and get whoever they had trapped. I really wished we weren't, and then I took a deep breath and stepped inside, hoping we hadn't been wrong. Once inside, I forced myself to keep moving until I got to the computer console, and then I tapped on the help button and typed in painkiller. As soon as I hit enter, several things happened at once. The pod hatch snapped shut and the lights began to flash. On top of that, a loud alarm went off. It was so loud that I had to cover my ears, but not before I heard a strange hissing sound coming from the pod walls. Hoping they weren't going to close in around me, I tried to find the source of the sound. Well, sucks to be me, I said, when I saw the white mist drifting out of small vents that had popped open in the ceiling. And then I discovered the pod wouldn't open. I didn't waste much more time than that, but grabbed the knife Mitch had insisted I carry and started cutting up the sheets on the bed. I had two options: stuff the cloth into the vents first, or make myself a mask and hope it kept out enough gas for me to still be conscious and breathing when the heritage arrived. I chose conscious and breathing, followed by blocking the vents, and even that might not have worked if the Evernatch hadn't been so close. I was feeling wobbly as I leant on the wall by the door and waited. I wasn't sure if they could scan in, and not sure what they'd do if they could. I figured they'd have to be curious about why I hadn't fallen over if they did. They sure looked curious. They were even surprised enough to see me that they backed up the few steps I needed to get them into position for Mitch. Mind you, I had to step down from the pod for that, and I nearly fell over right in front of them. Fortunately, the fresh air helped. It helped a lot, as did the shock of finding the Evernetch had sent three to come and fetch me. Why are you trying to kill us? I demanded by way of hello, and the Evernatch in the lead stared at me. I mean, we can't taste that good. Because this world belongs to the Evernatch, it replied. And the Evernatch put us here, I snapped, remembering I had to keep them talking while Mitch and Saeed lined them up. You didn't ask. You just shot us and stuck us here. Not that I'm not grateful. The world is perfect. But I mean, why bother? Why not just shoot us for real? And just like that, I was tearing up. Could feel my eyes starting to sting and my face grow hot and a lump forming in my chest that had nothing to do with fear. The Evenatch's next words stopped me cold. Because hunting you is the best way to celebrate taking this world for ourselves. But why? I wanted to know, hating the pleading tone that had entered my voice. Why do we have to die? Because you are right. This is a perfect world. Too perfect for the throwaways of every world that resists. It should be an Evenatch world. A purely Evenatch world. I watched the Evenatch behind him stir restlessly, as though wishing he'd hurry up and get the conversation over with. But why can't it be shared? Because then you'd want to put the next hostages here, and the next, and rule that they're good enough to share our technologies and our advances. And they're not. You're not. There should be no mercy. I don't see why we have to invite every backward ragtag mammalian race to join the Federation. They didn't evolve fast enough? Too bad. We should just be taking their worlds. Behind him, the two Evenatch raised their crests and hissed in agreement. It was the most motivated I'd seen any of the lizard aliens, and I didn't like it. I stared at their leader and remembered what Sisirva had said. I hadn't wanted to believe my keeper, but I'd chosen to take him at his word. Now I could see just how true it was, how much we were hated because we weren't like them. It wasn't fair, and it made me angry. You remind me of some people back home, I said, my voice rising in anger in spite of the tears that edged it. We called them red-necked hillbilly bullies. Actually, we didn't. My mum and dad called them that, but what I'd heard from their discussions about redneck attitudes sounded similar to what I was hearing from the Evenatch in front of me. Same us first to hell with everyone else attitude, same racist ignorance. It had made me mad to listen to my mum and dad discussing what they were saying, and it made me mad to hear it coming from this guy's mouth, too. And what would you call us then? He asked, and the sneer was back in his voice, like I wasn't good enough, and neither was the rest of the human race. Made the answer easy. Racists, I said. Don't you mean specists? Nope, we're all people, just different races. That got a reaction. His crest stood up and his eyes widened. The Evenatch behind him hissed in annoyance. Why are you bothering to talk with it? One asked, but its leader ignored it. Only people here, he said, pivoting slightly to point, are me and him and him. Humans are just meat to us, a delicacy we can mass produce for export to other worlds. Delicious and profitable. He looked me up and down, and I didn't like the way he did it. Maybe we don't need to eat you. We could just sell you as you are. I balled my hands into fists and would have completely abandoned the plan if Mitch hadn't spoken right then. Down. The word hit my ears through the comlink, and I hit the dirt. Mitch's warning came a few seconds before a large shadow swooped over my head, and another one came over the ground toward it. The lead Evenatch had enough time to look alarmed before the two logs met, pulping his head and chest between them, and knocking one of his companions flying. I rolled sideways, willing myself not to vomit, and trying to unsee what I had seen. It didn't work, and I knew as I half ran, half crawled away from the carnage that I had a few nightmares ahead of me. I heard another thud, followed by a shriek behind me, and guessed the logs had caught a second Evenatch on the backswing. I didn't stop to look, but kept running, putting Su-Lynn's pod between me and any Evenatch that might still be standing. Having survived the gas, I didn't want to end up by getting shot. I crashed through the bushes, running blindly as the world went wonky. Guess I hadn't completely survived the gas. Didn't matter. I was going to get as far as I could before it got me. Behind me, I could hear the two logs clattering and bouncing off each other, but no Evenatch shouts and no more screams. I let myself slow down, and then a wave of dizziness hit me, and I fell down. I heard the sound of footsteps running through the undergrowth and tried to get back on my feet. Funny how both trees and ground seemed to slip out from under my hand. Rotten gas. The footsteps came and stopped beside me, so I looked up, trying to see who it was. Mitch reached down and offered me his hand. I tried to take it, but it was never where I reached for. In the end, Mitch grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me up, draping my arm over his shoulder. That almost worked, but then my legs wouldn't cooperate and I pulled both of us to the ground. What's wrong with you? He asked, untangling himself. I sorted through my still tangled head, trying to find the right word, and pounced on it when I did. Gas. He cussed, and then he picked me up in his arms, all by himself. And I let him, because the world was too wobbly for me to do anything else. I thought about the logs and said the first thing that came into my head. You cut it fine. You jumped the gun, he snapped back, adding, as usual. But he was smiling as he said it. It was a nice smile, right up until it wavered out of focus and wandered off into the night.